Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the debut of our new Faith, Hope, and Love streaming content on our Sheen digital platforms. We're doing this while the Sheen Center is temporarily closed due to the ongoing COVID-19 crisis. I hope everybody watching on Facebook, on YouTube, is safe and healthy, and be assured of our continued prayers. I'd like to thank our partners at the National Review Institute for helping make this event possible. And of course, a huge shout out to our Sheen team who did a tremendous job at putting this together. I'd like to welcome National Review viewers. And if this is your first time experiencing the Sheen Center, we're thrilled to have you. We are the Art Center of the Archdiocese of New York. And we think it's particularly appropriate to kick things off with this conversation, which will explore the timely and provocative question, where is God in the current crisis? Hopefully it will help illuminate our way as we struggle to see light in the darkness. It's my pleasure to introduce today's two speakers. First, our moderator and good friend, Catherine Jean Lopez of the National Review and National Review Institute. She is also the author of A Year with the Mystics, Visionary Wisdom for Daily Living from St. Benedict Press. And joining her is also our good friend, Father John Marie Devaney, a Dominican friar and a chaplain with Dominican Friars Healthcare Ministry of New York, who's providing spiritual care for those directly impacted by the crisis, and who was profiled in a recent New York Times article. And if that's not enough, Father also has a show on Sirius XM Radio. Before I turn it over to Catherine and Father John, if you enjoy and value this type of programming, I encourage you to consider donating to the Sheen Center. We are committed to continue to bringing you programming inspired by faith, hope, and love. So at this incredibly challenging and critical time, any gift, no matter how small, makes a big difference in allowing us to continue this mission. So without further ado, Catherine, take it away.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Father John, for doing this today. I know that you and I both share a fondness for the Sheen Center, and I'm so gratified that we're able to continue having conversations like this through these virtual means. And so thanks again for joining me to do this.
I'm delighted to be here.
So, Father John, there are so many things.
It's quite a great honor to be helping out the Sheen Center. It's provided a nice light in the time in which we live here.
It really, it really is a blessing, and in the tradition, of course, of its namesake, Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, who made use of the media to share the gospel and to talk about the faith, and it's a real blessing that we're able to do this, particularly at this moment where, you know, people are experiencing this coronavirus in different ways. You know, there are the people who are quarantined. There are people who have to go to work every day. There's this new appreciation that frontline workers aren't just the people you are with every day, Father John, in the hospitals of New York, but also the people who work in grocery stores, you know, the UPS drivers, the FedEx drivers, the postal workers, people who I think we have a newfound appreciation for with this this threat. So, Father John, could you just begin by talking a little bit about your experience of this? You know, you've been in the city, going to the hospital since prep time. You know, I know you've anointed people who have had COVID. I know you're really in the thick of this. What has this experience been like thus far?
We had a little technical difficulty just on our part. So, yeah, just to be for full transparency with the audience, yeah.
Well, I'll talk just a little bit until we get synced up here.
Sure. No, I think it is quite fascinating. It's been a whirlwind. I mean, things aren't changing as much as they were in those first few weeks of March there, where it felt like every hour something new was happening. And now, there is a bit of a new normal. It's interesting too, I think, for a lot of us, and whoever's joining us, wherever they are in the country, since New York's an epicenter, everything is so on edge here still, and I found that our work, it's work we've always done, because we're always at the bottom of the ninth with the sick and the dying. But of course, it took a completely new scenario with COVID-19, and I found ourselves Netflix and is those see where is God leading us, and to be able to continue to have the trust in which we need. Sorry if there's a little delay into him.
So full disclosure, where I'm now texting Father John my questions, where I and see if we can do this way. Fortunately, we have multiple ways of communicating with one another here.
So I guess let me just ask this. Hopefully we're gonna reveal the curtain a little bit here now. So our director, can you hear me okay? And is my image coming through? And then I have the question from Catherine. Don't worry, we're not on union. There's no union staff here right now, so we're okay on ours. It's a bit choppy. Okay. Can we cut away to commercial? Is that possible? Any sponsors right now? Knights of Columbus will welcome you. So Catherine, how are the medical people dealing with COVID? This is interesting. I found that I had a feeling that 80% of our work, Catherine, be with the community. I just kind of no doubt in my mind that they would need the support. Yes, of course, you have to take care of the sick. You go in and see them. But the COVID patients in particular are so weak and so isolated because they have to be for the safety of everyone, people taking care of them and their families, that I have found that majority of my work is with the medical people. And the medical people are happy to be there. I believe deep down in my soul, in my 5 years or so as a chaplain now, doctor, nurse, that type of nurse, I think it's a calling, whether people realize it or not. I really do believe it's a calling. And I've seen how they've all been able to respond. Some of them have been scared, but for the most part, they dove right into the work. And, of course, we were just so on edge for those first few weeks. And now I've seen them settle into their roles, and mine too, for that matter. But many of them are Catholic. Many conversations of faith, many conversations, blessings given out, but a desire to also kind of be nowhere else. And the generation today, but nurses, late 80s, which is that prime time age, but really it's a great moment. So, all right. So asking, how is my faith now in the face of it? And so I found that at first I was scared for myself, no doubt about it, thinking about, okay, I'm going to be at risk. I'm going to be in with the virus day in, day out. We were hearing reports out of Italy about priests who were dying. Now, granted, a lot of them were elderly priests, but we were hearing a lot about how they were dying. And we were hearing also how about the frontline workers were getting sick. And I was nervous, no doubt. But then, maybe about 6-7 weeks ago, once we kind of settled into how we were going to approach things and realized we were here, a great peace came over me. So my faith, I think, was it tested and tried? Absolutely. But then also, like, there is a peace that only the Holy Spirit can give. There's a peace that surpasses all understanding that God gives many people their lives. I've encountered many patients who have it, especially when they're all the treatment has happened that they can have when they've done all they can do. I'll ask quite often, do you have a peace? And they said, yes, Father, I do have this peace. So I definitely have that peace that surpassed all understanding. And thanks be to God, aside from a few nights of poor, or many nights of poor sleep, that peace has left me. There is a certain hardness of walking into it every day. Now, the good news is the numbers are going down. So, obviously we get the Catholic lists in our work, but the numbers are decreasing. And you also see people improving and people getting out. And some people who are very, very sick, we're talking like weeks on ventilators, coming off now. And everyone's just amazed and shocked and thanking God, frankly.
It seems that we can communicate with one another again.
Yeah.
You're a lot less choppy. I'm going to attribute that to the prayers of Dominicans watching, because I believe some friars are watching. So keep the prayers going, guys. One thing I wanted to continue talking to you about is the faith aspect of this. And it was so strange, obviously, for so many of us to be living through Holy Week, not going to church. I know some churches, I think St. Catherine and St. Vincent are open during the day for prayer. I think St. Patrick's is for some hours of the day, but a lot of churches are closed. Obviously, we didn't go to masses and services. Easter came and went. People didn't go to mass. It's been a strange experience of the resurrection, right? How have you dealt with that? How have you talked to people about that? Because I'm sure I'm not the first person to ask a question like that to a priest.
Sure. Well, it was weird because did you see? There was a meme out on the internet. This is the lentiest Lent I've ever lented.
Yeah.
And then there was another one that said, "Boy, I didn't expect to give this much up for Lent," And so, Holy Week was strange because we could, So you think about this in Catholicism. The senses are engaged. In fact, one of my friends said, going to Catholic Mass is smell-o-vision. All of your senses are fully engaged at Mass, from smell and taste and see, all 5 senses. And we are such a tangible religion because God wanted to become one of us. He wanted to be tangible, when the Word became flesh. And I remember I was walking into one of the hospitals, and it was Palm Sunday evening, or maybe it was like Monday of Holy Week. And one of the janitors said, "Oh, hey, Father, are there any palms? Can I get any palms?" And I said, "Unfortunately, no, we didn't distribute any this year because it could have caused a lot of problems with people gathering or, anything being passed on, let's say, on the surfaces." And so I found here was somebody who wanted to have that tangibility of Palm Sunday, that tangibility of carrying something, to enter into that mystery of Holy Week. And they couldn't do it this year. And then also, too, from the priest perspective, as friars, we live in community. We always have several of us together. And our group of friars, we had to split some of our older friars out of our priory. And we were down to just 4 of us. And we decided we'd been offering liturgies separately because of just the safety and the social distancing, the fact that we're in the hospitals and we didn't want to be near one another. But we decided that for the Holy Week liturgies, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Sunday, or Easter Vigil, Saturday, Easter Vigil, we would go down to the church where we could be completely separate and safe. and offer liturgies together for the four of us. With the church obviously locked in the evening, we are open during the day. And it is a blessing for those churches that have been able to remain open for prayer. That's one thing here in the Archdiocese of New York I have to commend our leadership for. They allowed the churches to remain open when safe and plausible, so people could come in, light a candle, say some prayers, go to adoration, maybe go to confession. So that's been great, that the churches haven't been actually physically locked. Rome, they're open too the whole time, which has been great, despite the absence of Mass. So, Catherine Jean, here we are. And, to have Mass without a congregation for so long at such major events in the Catholic liturgical calendar, it was strange. I mean, I can count on both hands the times I've given people communion now since March 15th. Most of those were for viaticum in the hospital setting where people were dying.
One of the things that I've found amazing about this is that we've all stopped to protect innocent human life. And obviously, we live in a state in New York where we've seen abortion expansion. There's talk of assisted suicide being legalized on the horizon, and yet just yesterday, Andrew Cuomo talked about how it was something like every human life is precious. And I think, yes, Governor, let's have a conversation after this, I really, what have your thoughts been about this? You must have similar prayers that a consistency kicks in, and that we can all, whatever our political views, see the beauty in what we're doing right now, and see that become a part of our regular lives in a new way.
Oh, absolutely. Every soundbite, every media headline, every leader, obviously in our case here in the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who has said anything we do, everything you do, the ripple effect and how it can save one life. Or, you think the social guidelines are going down and you sneak out to have that, glass of wine with a friend, or, go for that jog together on a trail. And then you pick up the virus from somebody and then you bring it back home and you kill grandma, Mm-hmm. The epidemiologists have talked about that, as warning us, because that, this transmission spread. But no doubt, absolutely, in my mind, every time I've heard that if we can save one life, I'm not worried about numbers. I'm not worried about the economy. I'm not worried about this. I'm worried about lives. The contradiction compared to what is said with life before it can actually take a breath outside its mother's womb has echoed in my mind tremendously. And I think, could we just have a conversion of heart from, as we say quite often in speak, from womb to tomb of all lives? Imagine if the country shut itself down to help, crisis pregnancies and all the difficulties that quite often lead to, the culture of death, as John Paul II called it. So no doubt. And I think if any sane Catholic or person of goodwill who does believe that life begins at conception, or believes that there is something inherently dignant to the right to life in the womb until natural death, has to see Catherine has to see the, dare I say, it's a strong word, but almost like the schizophrenia sometimes.
Yeah.
How can it be? That's the word that comes into mind. It's crazy. So I am hopeful for that we can really look back. In fact, there was somebody who said, let's take all these politicians, and obviously the governor the most, who are saying these things about saving one life, and shutting down an economy, and then put them over pro-life advertising, use the same quotes, but put it with pro-life advertising. Yeah, I do hope, because one thing too, I'm in a very unique position, Catherine Jean. I've shared this a little bit on the media that I've done. I've shared it on sometimes on the Friars radio broadcast we have on Sirius XM, our show called Word to Life. I'm in a very unique position where I am dealing with a lot of baby boomers and their terminal cancer. So I encounter every week men and women usually in their 60s or 70s, who have been a part of the culture of death and got wrapped up in post Roe v. Wade times. And they themselves either procured or were involved with helping someone procure abortion. And I have found, in a beautiful way, in God's mercy, I've had the unique opportunity to help people make peace with what has overcome the country in the last 50 years now. And so I think there'll be a lot of changing of hearts and minds looking back at what we've done. And if the COVID-19 crisis helps fuel that and see that and shed better light to change the heart and mind on the attitude of so many people and our leaders, then even though sadly the people who did lose their lives in COVID-19 and the suffering, the economic toll, and the mental and the traumatic and the unemployment toll, then that's how we always believe, actually, as Catholics, that God can bring a greater good out of an evil, be it abortion or a pandemic.
Relatedly, the Little Sisters of the Poor had their case heard now, second round in the Supreme Court this morning, and similarly, Father John, I think there's something going on. It's ridiculous that the Little Sisters of the Poor, who run these homes for elderly poor, beautiful, beautiful homes. You've probably spent time in them. I've spent time in them. And it's ridiculous that they're dealing with COVID-19 right now, that they have to go to the Supreme Court. But on the other hand, God works with everything. And this has been, unprecedented publicity for the Little Sisters of the Poor. And so maybe there is an opportunity for people to pause and realize who they are, what they do, and how much we do owe our elderly. And also, part of the frustrating thing about, there are so many frustrating things about the abortion debate and the assisted suicide debate and all these conversations we have. Oftentimes, a little thing that gives me hope sometimes is the poll numbers on abortion in particular, where so many people say that they simply want to know that a woman in a difficult position has a choice, right? She's not forced to do something, right? When you start learning about the Sisters of Life, who even during coronavirus times are helping women who, including Sister Magdalene, who runs the Visitation Mission, was telling me the other day, including calling from inside Planned Parenthood, the very Planned Parenthood that's next door to the Sheen Center, looking for help. There are people who provide help, who are walking with women. And once people realize that's the case, it starts to change the politics, It makes people realize, oh, okay, maybe I don't have to support legal abortion because there are people who really helping women who find themselves in difficult situations, and that's very much the case with assisted suicide and the Little Sisters of the Poor as well. And we could both go down lists of ministries. Since we're talking to a Dominican, the Hawthorne Dominicans would be an example, who care for terminal cancer patients. And that place, you can talk about it more. I'm sure Father John is like a little window into heaven. It's just, there's such peace there because people are treated with such beauty and dignity. And there's a real love in the air. But I want to pivot. It's a little related. You were talking, Father John, earlier to me, just on a phone conversation, about how just before the world changed, as it did for coronavirus here, as we all, so many of us started to quarantine and things, you gave a talk on intercessory prayer. And I ask you to reflect on that a little bit, because I think people are struggling a bit or a lot with what do you do in this time, right? You alluded to redemptive suffering a few minutes ago. I'm curious what you're talking to people about suffering. How do you make redemptive suffering not sound like a pious thing a priest says, Yeah. And what is intercessory prayer, and how can we make use of that in a real way during these difficult times as people are suffering so dramatically?
Sure. Well, maybe maybe one of the first introductions to intercessory prayer was like, your family, your mother saying, "Fish at dinner, there's kids starving in China," and it's
Right,
something like
right.
that.
Send
And
you thought maybe you could send your food to Africa, right?
That's right. Yeah, don't waste that. There's kids starving in Africa. So in a way, okay, yeah, your virtue of temperance is actually, and your consumption, is being offered up to. All right, Mom, then I'll have another slice, I guess. Okay, because I don't want it to go to waste. But no, this was interesting. So obviously we were getting the news out of Italy in late February, very, very early March, and I had been asked to go give a little talk, maybe like an hour talk, morning of reflection with a mass, to a contemplative monastery here in the Archdiocese of New York, which has Dominican nuns there. And I want to give people at home who are listening a little difference between a nun and a sister. So you brought up the Little Sisters of the Poor and the good work they're doing. Of course, that'll be something I know we'll have to watch and follow, and we'll be able to expand on that down the road. Not to dodge your original question there with looking at their good work, but so a sister is someone who's active. So the Sisters of Life, the Sisters of the Poor, they're out and about in the vineyard, working with the poor, the elderly, teaching the sick. Nuns are contemplatives. They are in monasteries. So a lot of people say, "Oh, I was taught by the nuns," and so on. So nuns is kind of like the common term we use, but nuns are actually contemplative. So you think of Teresa Lisieux in the Carmelite monastery. So the Dominican nuns have a monastery here in the South Bronx. It was established in 1889 by the Archdiocese of New York, and it has remained all through these 130 years in the South Bronx. It has come and gone and seen what was once a rural area with farms in the South Bronx to, of course, the bombed out, desolation of the 70s and the 80s and 90s. And now it's in the Hunt Points area. It's actually seen a revival of that area. So the sisters have quietly, on their hilltop, literally from the tip of Manhattan, Battery Park City, up into about maybe Harlem, been able to see for 130 years the modern zenith of the world, as John Paul II called it when he visited, I think, in Brooklyn in '95, seen New York grow and the skyscrapers come up. And nuns will have a very special duty in having intercessory prayer. In his book, Rise Up, Let Us Be on Our Way, John Paul II, that was to his brother bishops, suggested that every bishop should build a monastery in a new diocese so that it can be the supernatural powerhouse of prayer, supporting the rest of the diocese. So intercessory prayer is something that these nuns are called to do, whether they're Carmelite or Dominican. And we had been kind of, it's always good for a friar or a priest to go in and give a little talk or a conference to the nuns to kind of encourage them and booster there, just like you'd get a homily, or you'd have a class or something, presentation at a parish. So I had given them this talk on intercessory prayer and the importance of it and their special role in it, all from the Catechism. The Catechism of the Catholic Church actually has some great sections on intercessory prayer. And how God, does he need our intercessory prayer? No, but does he delight in using us because of his generosity and the gifts that he has given us in our baptism of faith, hope, and love, that the theme of the series here? Yes, he totally delights in it. So that's why when people downplay, thoughts and prayers, take your thoughts and prayers, and I want action, that doesn't equate to laws or ban guns now. Hold the phone here. Yes, thoughts and prayers in the eyes of God are one of the greatest ways he delights in having mankind serve his holy will. So I'd given this talk on the nuns, on prayer to the nuns, and it was quite fitting because then that was Saturday, March 8th. Then by the following Wednesday evening, we had gotten a lot of information from our medical friends, our friends in medicine, who were saying, get ready, get your older friars out, start living separately because you're going to be approaching the patients. You're going to be more exposed to COVID-19 than other people are. So I then gave a call to the prioress up there and said, Sister, I said, with all due respect, you have to get ready and you have to treat yourselves almost like a nursing home would. So, and we're going to need your prayers for what has turned out to be the epicenter of the COVID-19 virus breakout in the world. New York City, of course, it has to be New York, right? It can't be China or Milan, or Wuhan. It has to be Manhattan. We got to be number one in everything, even a pandemic of the 21st century. So interestingly enough, the nuns had to retreat even deeper into their cloister and into their life, not even going out for maybe non-essential doctor visits, and really even limiting the staff who would come and help them into the monastery for fear of bringing the virus in. So they had to hunker down into this role of intercessory prayer. And I have no doubt in my mind, we're only going to find out in heaven, Catherine Jean, just how efficacious their prayers were for the Big Apple, as they, even at this moment right now, look out from their perch on the South Bronx Hill and pray for all of us here still going through the pandemic.
And for people who are perhaps right now separated from people they love who have the virus or are vulnerable to the virus, they can't visit their parents, they can't visit grandparents, they can't visit other loved ones. How can they too? Because we're all called to this contemplative life, even if we're active people, even if lay people, family people, whoever you are, you're called to some contemplation. How can we all engage in this intercessory prayer, particularly at this time of such intense suffering?
Well, easy enough. As a Dominican, we have an age-old or centuries-old answer to that question: the power of the Rosary. The Dominican order has promoted the Rosary, and the tradition is, small t tradition we call it, that St. Dominic was given the Rosary by Our Lady, and the Rosary we wear on our side. And for Catholics, of course, many people see the Rosary hanging from rear view windows or around hip hop stars' necks and the like. But nonetheless, the Rosary is something that we've had for 8 centuries, and the Holy Father, Pope Francis, in this month of May, has encouraged all families to pray the Rosary together. There's that old adage from Father Peyton, who I believe is a servant of God now: the family that prays together stays together. And that role of the family rosary that got the Irish through the famines. I mean, I still hear my Irish cousins would talk about how on a Saturday evening, the whole family would kneel and pray the Rosary together, in the home in Ireland, in the village, and how the Rosary has. We have the phenomenal story. We just had Pope Pius V, St. Pope Pius V's feast day on April 30th, the Battle of Lepanto, that he asked all of Christendom to pray the Rosary. Of course, this was before the Reformation, to pray the Rosary to bring down. No, I take that back, because historically he helped institute Trent. So it was, I think, during or after the Reformation. Got to get my church history right. But what happened? That tiny little army defeated the oncoming more forward and fleets. So what is the Rosary, though? It is a contemplative, meditative form of prayer with 3 simple things: the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Glory Be. Walking through the Gospels, walking through the life of Christ, both in his birth, death, resurrection, his preaching, and the glory that we have and hope to come. So the Rosary has been the age-old, powerful, calming, and connective source for the Catholic Church. In fact, one of our friars said it would be the 8th sacrament. If we could have an 8th sacrament, it'd be the Rosary. So I know it sounds so simple, Catherine Jean, but it's true, because it works, and God is simple. So he wants to give us something that's, I kind of often call it the treadmill for the soul. So people now can join and have Zoom and all these things with FaceTime and pray the Rosary over the phone together. My mother is 81, and she's been kind of homebound for the better part of 3 years due to just infirmity. But one of the joys we have is several times a week we get to pray the Rosary over the phone together. So it's that simple, but it's that powerful.
You, first of all, I want to just say, for people who are watching us live, please feel free to send questions in the comment section of Facebook and YouTube, and I'll take a look at some of those questions and feed them into the conversation. So please feel free to ask questions. Father John, I just want to push you a little bit more because you alluded to earlier, there is a skepticism. One of when it comes to prayer, one of the major New York papers in the last couple of years, after particular tragedies, had on the front page, God isn't listening to your prayers, as people say thoughts and prayers at the end of every time there's a mass shooting or a terrorist attack. And so the response increasingly has been, yeah, God's not listening to your thoughts and prayers. And the implication being that prayers don't mean anything and prayers aren't action. What, particularly in this coronavirus moment here, what gives you confidence, Father John? Obviously, you're a Dominican priest, and I hope you have confidence in God listening to our prayers. But as a Jersey boy, tell me why are you still believing this? Why do you have confidence?
Oh, well, if I didn't have confidence, I'd be in the wrong business. I should go find a wife and, make a family. No, I think it's this.
Thanks be to God, you have confidence.
Yeah, no, I do. Otherwise, I'm in the wrong business, Catherine Jean. And the Sheen Center, just pack it up and let's kill the broadcast now. With the confidence, let's. How about this? Just if I might start, what is the only institution in the world right now that has been through pandemics and plagues and pestilence and every other force of nature that you can imagine that is currently still here? It's the Catholic Church. We've been dealing with this stuff for 2,000 years. And, so that first and foremost, I'll just look back there. I'll look at 2 millennia of saints and scripture and tradition and apostolic teaching and reality and miracles and Western civilization to show that that's where my confidence lies. And if I want to go back even deeper, that I can see that we live in a world that started with Cain killing Abel and the bite of the apple that set it all off course. And yet we're still here. And people do have peace. And people do get through these times. And, that is the reality that it works. I mean, one thing I think often about is the Pope is prayed for at every Mass by name in the world every day. And, there's something I think statistically like 500,000 priests in the world. And let's just say on average, 1.5 Masses are celebrated. I mean, so there's probably, hundreds of thousands, close to 1 million Masses offered a day. I mean, I'm speculating here. Not all 500,000 priests or maybe have the health to offer Mass every day. But what does that feel like for the Holy Father to be known that you're being prayed for every day? That's how he's able to do his work. That's all the popes, whether they've been great popes or not, have been able to keep the church at least going and here. So I look back to that first and foremost. And then I think in our time, what we only hear is the negative. And there are some real miraculous stories. I mean, I have met patients who should have been dead. I've seen people who they thought that was it and they recovered. And then when we've found, people that have the fortitude and strength and the courage to show up and get things together, that's all a fruit of prayer.
You mentioned earlier, Father John, that that God is simple. I'm certainly simple, and I think a lot of us are. We tend to overcomplicate things sometimes, and the most simple question that everyone asks at some point in time is so, if God is love, and why on earth is He allowing this to happen? I think some people still have the experience of wanting to wake up from a bad dream, over the last couple of weeks. Why isn't God just making this go away? I heard one Sister of Life pray early on in this. It's just that COVID be eradicated. And I thought, yeah, we should all pray that boldly, right? But why doesn't God just eradicate it?
Yeah, that's the classic question. If God is all knowing, all loving, all consume, all omnipresent, then why do we live in a world where a 7-year-old can die of cancer, a virus can tear through the total international community, and wreak havoc? Don't forget God created the virus. I mean, it's part of creation. If we believe God is the creator, then okay, we live first and foremost in a fallen world. There are tsunamis, there's earthquakes, there's death. I mean, that's a reality. We do live in a fallen world. But what we do believe is that only God can bring greater goods from the evils. So whether the evil is something, God forbid, like mass shootings, or the evil is something like a virus, something that's in nature itself. One of our friars was telling me we did our broadcast a couple of weeks ago. He said something fascinating. He said that normality is a gift. Just having normal times of normal. I mean, how much with us right now we're like, yeah, you know what? My commute wasn't that bad. Or, it was kind of nice just dropping the kids off and, picking them up at, after school or whatever, And, I thought I had a boring job just going into the office park every day, but actually, and he said that normality is a gift. And Catherine Jean, that really struck me, like that just to have things be copacetic, if you will, that actually is a gift in itself, and to have that stability. So here we are now in complete what we would feel as, instability, but yet God is still here, and He wants to be here. And what is the greater good that He'll bring from this? I've no doubt in my mind, soon, within the next year or two, we're going to see, I believe, drastic improvements in elder care. We're seeing that now, and nursing homes won't just become dumping grounds or warehouses till death. That'll be a great good that's going to come out of this, and maybe, just maybe, a lot of people, like we talked about earlier, revisit their stance on when life begins and the sanctity of it. And then also, too, you and I have talked about this, Catherine Jean, and we could do another broadcast on this, but we still have to pray. And God bless Fulton Sheen, our patron here at the Sheen Center. It's got to make us revisit our prayers, and maybe I'm going back to intercessory prayer a little bit, for the end of communism. Communism is still a real threat in the world. Look at the Chinese. They need our prayers deeply. Mm-hmm. So that's how God will take the evils of something that came out of a communist country. And maybe, we're not saying that it could have been stopped, but I think we can all collectively say maybe it definitely could have been handled a lot better. We know that. And it could have been a lot more honest and a lot more transparent. I mean, anybody can safely say that without being an international secret intelligence expert, And so now we have this great opportunity in our lifetime, as Fulton Sheen and his generation prayed for the end of the fall of the Iron Curtain. As I mentioned, let's start praying for the end of the fall of the Red Curtain. So maybe we'll look back 15 years from now and go, it was the coronavirus that led the globe to pray for and peacefully change and realize its relationship with the continued flaws of the communist philosophy.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Every time we talk, you mention that, and I think it's so important.
I do feel it's striking me deeply. But anyway, I'm sorry, Catherine.
I'm glad it does. I'm glad you brought it up, because I think that this is one of the things that we're not talking about enough. And the Fatima feast day is coming up, right? We're in May, the Mary's month, and what did she say? She talked about praying for the end of communism in the Soviet Union, right? In Russia. And every time, I feel sorry for myself that I can't go to Mass. I think of the underground church in China. I think about the persecuted church throughout the world. But I do think you're right. I think we have a special obligation to China right now, and the poor, suffering people of China. We talked about earlier innocent human life. The poor girls who aren't allowed to live in that country. There's so much suffering, and there really is, God gives us these invitations that we frequently don't realize he's giving us. And I do think this is one of those moments. And in addition to to China, I can't get beyond, to be honest with you, the fact that this all started during Holy Week, during Lent and then Holy Week, Oh my goodness, if there isn't an opportunity to unite ourselves to the suffering of Jesus, right? It was so loud and clear. And you alluded to, the Lent memes that were on social media. I wonder if, as we're understandably, feeling sorry for ourselves, being quarantined, or, having to homeschool, all the things that we didn't expect to have to be doing this spring. Maybe there's this invitation to be entering into the suffering more in solidarity. If we are, thanks be to God, are healthy, to enter into the suffering of others prayerfully in a whole new way. Cardinal Dolan mentioned in one media interview I saw him on, he said, noting this point about Holy Week and Easter, it's almost, and Passover too, happening at the same time, right? He said it's almost like we have this mystic moment where there are all these convergences, and it's a real invitation. I think that maybe we're really have to enter into a little bit more. And as David mentioned earlier, that I put together this book, A Year with the Mystics, and I'm curious, Father, are there any saints in particular? There are some great Dominican mystics who really, had one of the gifts of the mystics is they help us enter into the life of Christ in a more intense way. Are there any mystics or other saints who you would particularly recommend that people get to know a little bit better during this time to go deeper into the Christian life?
Oh, sure, totally. And I'm glad you brought that up about how this happened during Lent and Holy Week, the timing of everything. And as we're in the Easter season now, we're in the Easter glory. Let's also parallel, before we just get into a couple of mystical recommendations, Catherine, is what's been happening during the Easter season now is the numbers are going down. We're learning how to social distance. We're getting testing now. So all these natural things and these scientific and data things are working because of the suffering, if you will, we did, or the solidarity we did together in our social distancing, our lockdowns, our economic downturns, and the unemployment, all that crush, that happened. Now we're coming out of the tomb a little bit. We're seeing little lights at the end of the tunnel every day, thank God, even though there are places in the other parts of the country now, besides the Northeast, that are beginning to feel the pandemic in a stronger way. That here we are now in the Easter season, Pentecost is May 31st, that maybe by June 1, we're really entering into this new glory and this revival. So you're right about, and with the Cardinal mentioned that, don't miss the moment really to have this be transformative or listen more to the voice of God, because it's going to be so easy, myself included, to just keep listening to the stats, the data, the news, the headlines, and the social media and the endless articles. And I've realized too, like, everybody's got an opinion. I've read some more opinions that I can even, count on one hand, with all due respect to the opinion writers.
Yes, those of us who make a living doing that. Thank you.
I've realized I've read more opinion than news, I think. But two great mystics, I think. First and foremost, she's the patron of where we live, the Dominican Priory of St. Catherine of Siena here, where we run our healthcare ministry out of and the chaplains live. St. Catherine of Siena was born during the bubonic plague. 80% of Siena was wiped out the year after she was born because the virus had arrived, the plague had arrived down in Sicily a year earlier. She is the patroness of those who care for the sick. So, and St. Catherine of Siena, great mystic, her book called, Dialogue with God, where it's the soul of this woman and God speaking to her soul. And it was, written down as she kind of was going through this mystical experience. So any time spent with Catherine of Siena, especially her love of suffering, her love of the passion, all the mystics love suffering. Hold on. They're not masochists, but when they understand that suffering is not to be wasted or does not have to be wasted. So the mystics understand that suffering, as Christ suffered, is a key to paradise. Then the other great mystic just of the last century would be Saint Faustina Kowalska. She was 33, same age that when Catherine of Siena died at 33 as well. I think I'd love to see one day a comparison of the Catherine of Siena's dialogue and Saint Faustina's diary. She was the first saint of the new millennium, and it was all about what? The message of mercy, divine mercy, that God is merciful, God loves us, and by Christ's, passion, death, and resurrection transformed the world, and now has this continued love letter to mankind of mercy. And that's what I think, that mystical element of Catherine looking at suffering and Faustina reminding us of God's love and mercy, because God is love. We hear love is love all the time. It's false. God is love. Love can't self-generate itself. It has to have a source. And then also his mercy. So I think those two, St. Catherine of Siena and St. Faustina Kowalska, are great pillars to enter into the mystical life, and especially in our time.
I have to say, I have a whole new appreciation of John of the Cross during this time, especially with the churches closed and the inability to get to mass. The dark night of the soul is something that I'm relating to a lot more and appreciating. And Mother Teresa too, who experienced, she gave so much and didn't necessarily have the consolation in prayer that you think she would have, as so many people know and were surprised to learn. And yet she had that joy in suffering and serving the poorest of the poor. And as you say, it's so important to point out that we're not loving suffering for just because they wanted to beat up on themselves. They saw it as union with their beloved, with Christ himself. And when you realize that what you're going through is nothing that God didn't go through himself, and that he's with us in it. It takes on whole new meaning. And I do think we have this huge opportunity to explore that and walk with one another more in that. So redemptive suffering isn't just something that sounds like a pious anchor that people latch onto, but it's something real that can help us flourish. And I want to ask you, before our time is up, Father John, you alluded to miracle stories and some of what's giving you hope in the midst of this. What I know I've seen some of them, including a colleague whose mother had coronavirus, and it could have been really bad, and it wasn't. And you alluded to some of those stories you've seen. What are some of the hopeful stories that you've seen in the midst of coronavirus, Father?
The first thing that comes to my mind is really, again, we talked about it at the very top of the show, the dedication of the healthcare workers. And now someone who seems as ordinary as a grocery bagger all of a sudden is viewed in a completely different light. If we can not lose sight of that, and that can be transformative on society, the people who seem to have some of the most simplest jobs, if you will, then that, I think, is a great sign of hope for me, and a great direction we can go in. I think also, too, what has been a sign of hope is that this is multinational, it's beyond borders, it's beyond walls, it's beyond ideologies. It is something that we're all going through together. And, and frankly, unlike the Spanish flu, there's not a world war going on. Now, also, too, the other thing I look forward and hope about, it's quite been said that, I was just thinking about the statistic today. I think there's something like 1 in 6 Americans are Catholic. And so that, I think, makes somewhere around, 70, 80 million Catholics in the U.S. And of course, frankly, the truth is not all American Catholics are practicing, but once you're Catholic, you're always Catholic. So my hope, and what I look forward to big time as a priest, as we continue to go through And we're not, it ain't over yet. We got a long road ahead of us. But how are our fellow Catholics going to use this as an opportunity to renew their faith, renew their families, and renew their sacramental encounter with Christ and his mercy, the Eucharist, confession, building better marriages. And that'll all ripple out into maybe what's frankly going to be a humbling of society and looking at what was our excesses versus what were our necessities. So those are the things that give me hope.
It's become a little cliche to talk about the weird dreams you're having during this time, but I do have this reoccurring dream that I try to get to Mass after we reopen, confession and Mass, and I can't because the lines are so long. And isn't that a wonderful prayer to have, that the lines are so long? That would be a blessing.
Great. And listen, the other thing too is you don't have to sit there for 20 minutes. We can, even if you haven't been to confession in 30 years, we can take care of you in 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be. We don't need all the gory details. We don't need to hear the sins of your husband or your wife. We just need to hear yours.
Well, on that note, getting us to confession when things reopen. Thank you so much, Father John. And I'm going to give this over to David DeSerto in a second. I just want to say thank you to the Sheen Center. The National Review Institute loves teaming up with the Sheen Center, and it is certainly my prayer that we'll be able to do things like this in person before too long. Again, this Sheen Center is a great gift that we have in New York. So thanks again, Father John.
Well, you're most welcome. And folks, if you're not able to, buy the tickets to actually go to events and things like that, don't forget to continue to support these great entities and organizations, because we do need to gather in person and we need those spaces and places to do just that.
Yeah, we do. David?
Well, thank you, everybody. First of all, I just want to apologize for those early hiccups, but our two speakers, being the pros that they are, we appreciate that they were able to roll with the punches and soldier through. As Catherine said, I'd love to thank our friends at the National Review Institute and Dominican Friars Healthcare Ministries for the tremendous work they do. Most of all, I'd love to thank our two speakers, Catherine and Father John. I invite you to join us next week next Wednesday, same time, as we expand this conversation a little bit and partner with Catholic Medical Mission Board and America Media to talk about the global response, the global Catholic response to healthcare crises around the world. And again, we really love bringing this type of content to our viewers, and we hope that you enjoy it and value it. But we can't do it without your help. So just to follow up on what Father John said, we encourage you to consider making a gift to the Sheen Center at sheencenter.org, as it says at the bottom of your screen. Again, no gift, no matter how small, is unappreciated. It makes a big difference. And if you can't contribute financially, we certainly ask that you keep the Sheen Center in your prayers. As Father and Catherine said, prayers are in the end what is most efficacious for us. So we appreciate your prayers with wholeheartedly as well. So thank you so much. We ask that you stay safe. We will continue to keep you and your loved ones in our prayers. So until next time, thank you. Stay safe. God bless.